Today I'm here with the one and only Jaiden Geolingo.
What's up, guys?
So you want to introduce yourself a little
Yeah,
bit?
yeah, yeah. Hey guys, I'm Jaden. I'm from the Philippines. I came here to America about a few years ago. I'm a junior in high school, and yeah, I've been writing poetry for quite some time now, but pretty recently. But yeah, we're gonna go into that a lot so here. Thank you so much, Nico, for having me and interviewing me. I'm really grateful for this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Nico Kharat. I'm also poet writer, as well as an editor for Aster Lit, and I work in the podcast section now. So that's why we're doing this podcast today. When did you start writing again?
I started writing around entering sophomore year and late freshman year. So yeah, I forgot to introduce some other stuff for writing. I'm the editor-in-chief of Hominem. I have a poetry chapbook out titled How to Migrate Ghosts. And yeah, writing has been such a big part of my life, and being able to be interviewed about it is always such a fun experience. So yeah.
I can contest that book is really good. So you guys should totally
I love
buy
the book.
that. I
Thank you
think it's
guys.
it's
Thank you.
from
Thank you so much.
Kith Books
Yes, book.
Press. So
Yes, yes,
check
yes.
that out. So you already talked a little bit about this, but the first question I had written down was, what's been your writing journey thus far? Because as a young writer, there's not I don't know, there's not a whole
Yeah.
like collection of
Yes.
your journey, but regardless, coming as an immigrant into America
Mhm.
and adapting to the writing scene over here, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I actually started writing, like I said, freshman year and going into sophomore year. So pretty recently compared to some of my other peers. But I think my writing experience was very reliant on consistency. I used to be so crazy and write like three poems a day when I first started writing. And so while I don't do that anymore now, it helped me get into that whole mindset and routine of writing and helped me create and build some philosophies that I still follow to this day. But yeah, as term of my writing journey, more specifically, I do poetry a lot. That's basically my main medium. And I want to try and expand outward from that as well, but currently I'm very focused on poetry. And yeah, I have a poetry chapbook out titled How to Migrate Ghosts. And a lot of my writing centers within this whole boundary of immigration and identity. And I have that sort of geographical hold within my writing a lot. So, yes.
All right, very interesting.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, who are the writers that have influenced your voice a lot? In which ways do they impact your work?
My main inspiration is Ocean Vuong. That's my favorite poet of all time. I actually have all four of his books on my bookshelf right now. So, yeah. But yeah, he has such a masterful craft that I really love. He has this sort of theme that recurs a lot in his writing that resonates with me most of the time. He writes, he has this skill that I really admire where he hones in on such specific experiences and transforms them into a lot of different specters of meaning and, purpose. He has this really good grasp on the immigrant experience and his identity as an Asian American. And I think I share the sentiment with a lot of other young writers that Ocean Vuong has really opened a lot of our eyes to poetry. But yeah, aside from Ocean Vuong, I really, really love Richard Seikin. I think his writing style is something that I was introduced to first. It's such a beautiful writing style that I feel like has such an amazing intimacy to it. He explores a lot of themes like with intimacy and, queer culture. And it's really nice to see like a lot of different experiences and opening up to a lot of different points of life with these writers. So, yeah, I also just read a lot of literary magazines as part of my writing journey. I feel like I don't really read a specific writer per se, but more so read specific work. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to ask, in regards to Ocean Vuong and Richard Seikin, are there
yeah.
specific things that you enjoy about their style, and maybe specific habits of theirs, literary wise? And is also, as per literary magazines, are there any that you're particularly interested in, or that are particularly any standouts to you?
Yeah, so for Ocean Vuong, one thing that I really love about his writing style is his care for his images. He has very elegant imagery and very elegant metaphors that you have to reread a lot to grasped the first time. His favorite poem of mine, Homewrecker, I think that's the name. And
That's a
I,
really good one.
yes, yes, and Devotion. Those two are really good poems because I feel like they're packed with so many images and imagery, and I feel like Vuong doesn't tend to really outwardly express his theme. You have to read between the lines and take into account the subtext and the other themes in relation conversation with each other. But as for Richard Saikin, I feel like he does quite the opposite of Ocean Vuong. I think Richard Saikin has the skill where he has so much simplicity, but yet this like tenderness with his writing. Like he doesn't have this flowering, elegant imagery that Ocean Vuong has. I feel like his is more direct and blunt, but in a beautiful way. Like Scheherazade, that poem, and my favorite from his is probably the Litany poem. I think I can't really remember the specific title, and Boot Theory. Those are really good poems, and he plays with white space a lot, Richard Teichen, and that's something that I take into account for my writing. It's a really beautiful technique where he utilizes all the margins in the page and doesn't only take into account the language of the poem, but at the same time how it's structured visually. So those are some of the elements and like practices and philosophies that I want to follow with my writing.
Okay, really interesting.
Mhm.
Especially how you mentioned that their like styles are pretty distinct. Ultimately, they're like their respective, I don't know,
Mhm.
quirks are still things that like you like learn from a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
I think it's really like I don't know, interesting approach to like writing and taking into consideration other people's styles for
I
inspiration.
agree.
Yeah, and I especially see that with a lot of your work.
Mhm.
Like, so your stylistic approach can vary, but I appreciate that like most of the themes and your images are like consistent throughout. So it's like I don't know, like you have a very like specific vibe to your work, but at the same time, it's really diverse. So I think that's
Yeah.
really cool.
I think also a lot of Richard Saikin and Ocean Vuong were two of the poets that I emulated and mimicked a lot when I first started writing out. A lot of writers, or honestly, I can speak for everyone, honestly, a lot of writers don't have their own like voice the first time they write, and so they tend to emulate other writers that they like. In my case, which is Ocean Vuong, and so yeah, I feel like a lot of writers need to spend some time and find that comfort in their own work. So they tend to, try and mimic other writers. And so Vuong and Taikin were those two for me. So yeah, just a little 2 cents.
On the topic of like voice, how would you say that you came to craft your own voice when it came to writing? Because developing like a unique voice like amidst like a sea of like so many writers and so many remarkable poets is like a difficult thing to do. And because I think you have a pretty distinct voice in your writing, but like what advice would you give in creating that standout kind of voice?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah. So I feel like voice for me, it really took a while. I think it took a lot of months think, for me to be comfortable in my writing in poetic voice. I think more of it came just from, like I said, being consistent in your writing because I read so many poems and I wrote so many poems when I first started out that I feel like that sort of practice helped me develop my own voice. Just there's not really a fixed route to developing your own, poetic outlook and your poetic voice, but I think it really just boils down to consistency, but at the same time, reading a lot of different poets, not just finding poets that have similar voices, but finding poets that have very distinct voices from one another and trying to combine and amalgamate those different voices into one, seeing what works best for you.
All right, really interesting. The next question that I had, kind of tying into what we were talking about voice and how you have a
Yeah.
distinct way of writing, I had written down like, have you ever felt pressure to explain or represent a particular identity or place through your work, and how do you navigate that expectation?
Yeah, I think this is a topic that's circulated a lot within the teen writing community, but I feel like the whole idea of poetry being an outlet, of course, but I feel like a lot of people tend to see that outlet as only for a traumatic kind. They write a lot about, identity and prejudice and violence in their writing that I see a lot across teen writers and teen pieces that I feel like you're intrinsically pulled to writing about, your trauma. But I feel like when I first started writing out, that's what my mindset was, to be as blunt and trauma dump in my writing as much as I can. But I feel like that's such an unhealthy approach now, because yes, poetry is the best outlet, and for me personally, the best outlet to write and express your feelings. But a lot of teen writing competitions per se, they try to beckon young writers to write about these traumatic experiences like diaspora or prejudice, hate crimes, that they sort of tend to commodify it. But it's really important to, of course, have that sort of balance. We need to see some hopeful poetry sometimes. We need to read some poetry that brings love and light, and have that basically balance with each other. So yeah, I navigate this sort of thing as much as I can with just trying to like see which experience would benefit like my writing. I think I'm kind of going on a ramble now, but find that balance in your poetry. Try like not to conform to what other like writers if you see are winning. If you see a lot of other poets winning this specific contest because they have a similar thread of their themes, just because they do that doesn't mean you have to really dig deep into yourself and find and unearth some really traumatic experiences just so you can feel like it can win you a prize. Art is meant to be comforting medium, not a way or outlet for you to resurface something you want to keep down. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I wanted to discuss more about a term you use about commodifying
Yeah.
poetry and literature. I think that's a really interesting point to make because recently I agree, I've been seeing a lot more like almost people just trying to sell things or win things
Yeah.
in regards to poetry and art and literature. And
Hmm.
I think it's really an interesting discussion to have. So I guess what would your perspective be on this commodification of poetry? Specifically, like I was thinking like insta poetry or
Right,
like
right.
I don't know, less developed books that people are putting out. Like
Hmm.
how would you say like we combat that? Because I think it's really interesting to divorce like commodification and just trying to sell poetry, literature, work like that, and actual like authenticity in work. Like how would you
Yeah.
say we combat this culture that's coming across?
I wanted to talk about that for a while, so thank you for giving me the, leeway to do that. But the whole commodification of poetry really is pretty much because of general audiences. A lot of really popular poetry books today, I personally feel like don't hold as much depth that you see in, let's say, literary magazines. That's because they're trying their best to cater to this whole general audience of readers and trying to market that. But I think there's a good side and bad side to this. The good side is that we're able to introduce poetry to the more general audiences and make it more palatable. But this can be their introduction to more, deeper, more complex forms of poetry. But in the bad side, they won't be introduced to these complex, beautiful forms of poetry firsthand. So they might not even know that it exists and that they already have that fixed like notion that poetry is this bland, boring thing. So yeah, I think we could combat this by trying our best really to show them the beauty of poetry and poets like Ocean Vuong, Richard Saikin, Joy Harjo. All these different poetic figures are so big in the world that really get brushed, like just shoved under the rug because of these. It's fast fashion in poetry form, if that makes sense. It's just very marketable nowadays that they don't really get to see the beauty of it. Like again, I'm going on a tangent, but really the commodification of poetry shouldn't be as rampant as it is now. Because yes, of course, we as writers and poets need to make some, coin, because we are unfortunately subjected to that now with our current political climate where, money is being very held high in our standards. But at the same time, we can't lose that whole thesis of art where we use it to express our feelings and, find the more intricate, delicate forms to find that expression. And so, just having this insta poetry view and just having that marketable generic type of poetry. I don't think it's going to be used to the fullest potential. And then people are just going to have that fixed viewpoint on what poetry is when it's really much more bigger than that.
Yeah, interesting points all around. Especially like I think I just wanted to add when you talked about how in our current like socio-political climate when it comes to creating arts, like I think it's so tragic in a sense because all
Yeah,
of these poets want to continue, you know, writing poetry, being authentic in their art, but it's so difficult, especially in these times when you have to like sell the book, you have to sell your work in order to survive as an artist. So
exactly.
I don't know, I just think that's so like tragic for our community,
Exactly.
and I think it's so important to keep supporting each other and
Mhm.
creating this stable, safe space for writers, authors, people interested in the arts and literature
Yeah.
overall. So I think it's also great that a lot of youth writers like yourself are contributing to that environment, keeping these literary magazines alive.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think we really should test the waters a lot. Like for the general audiences should test the waters a lot when it comes to poetry because like I said, it's such a multifaceted art form that, but most people consider it a dying art. And a lot of the reason why it is a dying art is because we don't really get to swim in that whole sea of beautiful work because they're so used to this whole foreground of insta poetry and, fast poetry that they don't really get to see the whole work and effort put into it by longer forms of poetry and more non-palatable, like not easier to digest poetry. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I guess like another question though I had written down,
Yeah.
going past like the socio-political aspects of
Yes.
art, I guess it was this is more connected to like voice and identity, like we
Uh-huh.
discussed earlier. Like you write a lot about the American South and
Yeah.
sometimes your turbulent relationship with it. So I was wondering how your geographic environment influences your work and how Southern culture might shape you.
Yeah. As an immigrant, I shifted from the Philippines to America, which are two very different cultures and expectations and customs. So it was a very jarring shift for me. I kind of view this whole geography thing as, every region, every country has their own different like systems and structures, food, culture, music, art. Writers from that specific region, you kind of see that like systems reflected on their work. And so you can kind of tell where they're from. So me as an immigrant moving from the Philippines to the American South, my work shifted a lot. But like I said, I didn't start writing until, I was already in America. But I feel like I've already always had that sort of poetic lens, like outlook towards life. Because, poets, they tend to absorb the world around them in a more delicate and intrinsic artistic way that most people don't. And so I've always had that sort of delicateness in viewing the world. And so moving from the Philippines to America, I had to adapt to their different customary views and customary cultures. And so it plays now a big role in my life when I write about the South because I haven't lived in the South long enough to, write a quote unquote Southern poem. I'm more so writing a Southern poem from the lens of an immigrant or a foreigner living in the South. And so that really shifts a lot in my writing because, like I said, I don't think I'm, or definitely not the package for a Southern person. Like geography plays such a big role in my writing, especially as an immigrant, because I think there's so many things that you can say and express within your geographical location.
Hey, really interesting. I would say like I had the not necessarily the same experience because
Um,
I did grow up in the Midwest.
yeah.
So a lot of my Midwestern poetry, I think it's interesting how you said you write about like the South through the lens of an immigrant, while I write about like maybe like the Midwest
Mhm.
through the lens of like a Midwesterner, but
Yeah.
who's second generation. I think it's just a really interesting point to make. I
Mhm.
also wanted to talk about how you said that in the Philippines versus the American South about there's different like worldviews and how that influences your writing, like a different way
Yeah.
that you look at the world. I don't know if it's specifically tied to like a literature standpoint, but I was wondering like, does like the way you look at literature maybe differ between these two settings? And if so, like how so? Like if they do.
Growing up, I've always been more, inclined to speaking English. I've always been an English guy. So with that came like not really the inability, but not the level of proficiency of speaking my native language compared to my peers who speak it in such a fluent, amazing way that I don't get to. because I grew up, watching a lot of English shows, a lot of reading a lot of English books. And so I would say I'm more closer to a native speaker in English than I am as a native speaker in my native tongue, which is kind of disheartening. But, s- in terms of viewing literature, American literature and Filipino literature is so different, of course, in terms of, language, obviously, but at the same time, themes. Like, I think Filipino literature, I've observed the Philippines as a very passionate country. They're very tapped into the arts and the I don't know, religion as well. But America is, while they are pretty similar in terms of that, America is very much so more like flexible. I guess that's the term. Like they write about so many different things that you can't really think of. And I noticed that poetry, more specifically, a lot of Filipino poets, they tend to write about their culture a lot. That's what I try to do. I want to have fragments of my culture and my identity in my writing as much as I can, even though the piece isn't per se related thematically to my culture. If that makes sense.
No, yeah, that's a really interesting point about how culture kind of like seeps into your writing,
Mhm.
regardless about what exactly might be like concerning theme wise. I think it's a really interesting way to like analyze or consider poetry. I hadn't really thought about that, about how, regardless, like culture is going to, like your identity is going to shape whatever poem you make. So it's really interesting to talk about. Oh, but I did have a question about diaspora. I
Yeah.
said, what's your take on the diaspora genre, like critiques, counter
Mhm.
arguments, like grievances, but also like anything that you appreciate and the comfort
Yeah.
you find in all of those questions?
That's a great question. I love to talk about this specifically because I think diaspora as a genre in poetry is seen so much, and it's such a really delicate topic that I love to write about. But at the same time, I think a lot of young writers specifically, they are really more typically inclined to write about diaspora nowadays because this ties into my earlier point with the whole commodification and the utilization of trauma in, writing. And this kind of ties well into diaspora as well, because a lot of writing competitions, they kind of beckon young writers to write about this sort of diasporic experience that they have and what they go through. And it'll end up becoming, I feel, a little, I want to say harmful, for lack of a better term, to their writing, because if they're gonna write all the time from this whole space and border of like diaspora in a negative way, like i.e. leaving your culture behind, but they don't really see that opportunity to write about diaspora in a more positive way. Like America for me was a great choice. I love the Philippines. I miss it a lot, but America has opened up so many doors for me specifically, and I'm really want to be able to write about diaspora in all forms. Like I've written about it in a negative way about how it's affected me in my cultural identity, but at the same time, how it's helped me grow as a writer and seeing my sense of belonging in America and even in the South generally. So yeah, diaspora, it's a very sensitive and very, like I said, delicate topic, but with the right care, I feel like you can do so much with it. And I just hope that you don't use diaspora as like not as a way of just trying to win something, but if it really truly does mean something to you, because it's a lot of different things that come into it that blend into one whole bigger picture.
Really interesting. I also wanted to ask about your opinion, maybe because I've seen the opinion that diaspora can sometimes be kind of like U.S. centric, and that
Yeah.
other narratives get pushed like out of the story. I wanted to ask, like, maybe do you think that's like a valid claim, or if I don't know, like obviously there's criticisms in the diaspora field, but like, what do you think that people could maybe do better, I guess, to
Mhm.
make diaspora a more welcoming field instead of something that is more typically associated with commodification
Yeah.
or like in a negative light in the writing
Mhm.
industry.
I I really like what you said about how diaspora is most people think of it as, US centric, but it goes both ways as well. It can be someone who grew up in the America, like immigrating into a country that is very different in terms of culture. Like, for example, a Filipino American like me, let's say if they were born here, they immigrate back into the Philippines. So it's a whole nother landscape and a whole nother field to explore within writing. But simultaneously, I don't want it to be commodified, like you said. So what I can, for word of advice to explore it in a more delicate way, I guess would be to really absorb it. Like, think about your experience as an immigrant and think about how you, as a writer exploring the diaspora, what were your experiences with it? How did it affect you? How did it affect the people around you? How did it affect your craft in writing? Because, like I said, it's such a broad topic. So it's important to be able to recognize and acknowledge all these different intimate fields that you don't really ever see on the foreground because most people just write about it, from traveling from point A to point B and the effects of that. But at the same time, you don't really write about the effects of the people around you. How does it affect your culture? How does it affect your craft? How does it even affect to I don't know how to explain it. Like, how does it affect everything, not just one specific honed in thing?
No, that's a really interesting point, especially what you said about crafting a more individualistic voice. Like, I
Yes.
think that's something to like really consider when writing diaspora, because again, like a lot of people tend to kind of dive into like a cliche when you write. Like, you should be looking at like the larger picture of diaspora and
Yeah.
how it influences everything, not just like a
Mhm.
couple like my mom cut apples for me when she was
Yeah.
mad.
That's a
you know,
very that's a very common like trope that they use in diaspora
yeah.
writing that I feel like I said, there's so much that goes into it, and there's always a
Mm.
positive to diasporic writing because, like I said, there's always positives to it. Like moving to America was a great decision for me, and although the current political climate is not as like friendly towards immigrants, I think that socially, for example, it's a great way, and artistically, moving to America was a good thing. So there's always benefits to it, and there's of course always, cons, but it's really good to see the bigger picture and how it combines into one whole thing.
I had a fun question because we've been talking
Yes.
about like a bunch of writing, so I added a fun one so we could break
Okay.
it up.
Okay.
If you were an ice cream flavor, which ice cream flavor would you
Oh
be?
my God. If I was an ice cream flavor, what flavor would I be? My favorite ice cream flavor is a very generic, basic one, which is vanilla. But
Bro,
but okay, hear me out. I think if we're talking metaphorically,
metaphorically.
cookies and cream flavor would probably be reflective of who I am. Because if we're thinking about this, like I said, metaphorically, like cookies and cream, it's like a combination of so many different flavors, I guess, and so many different ingredients. Just basically saying it's vanilla is plain, cookies and cream is multiple things.
Well, I'm seeing it.
So I guess
I
like
agree with this.
yeah,
Maybe
I
something
guess like
like a waffle cone, but like a boring waffle cone.
I guess at the same time, so it just means like all the different facets of me, you know? Well,
Cookies and
in
cream.
terms I don't know, man. I don't really eat ice cream that much, so I'm
So
gonna be
you hate
honest. Hey, it's
fun.
winter. We're in the winter right now. It's pretty cool to eat ice cream.
You live in the South.
And okay, it's actually like 80 degrees right now. So
Oh my god. Okay.
yeah.
Well, I want
Yeah.
to see what ice cream I would be. I would be
What
Rocky
would
Road.
you?
I would definitely be Rocky Road.
I see it. I see it. I
Okay, I
see
thought
it.
you were
I
about to
see it.
disagree with me. I was
No,
like,
I
okay,
see it. I see it. Rocky Road. Yeah, I get
Rocky
it.
Road. Okay, the next one I had up was what piece of your writing are you like most proud of, and why does it stand out to you personally? Because you write like a lot of poetry.
Mhm.
I've had the pleasure of reading so much of it,
Yes.
but I feel like you have a couple pieces that are more standouts that you've done more experimentation with. So I was
Mhm.
just wondering which pieces that like you registered as like more unique, some of your stronger work.
Yeah. So there were two pieces recently just published a few days ago in Dialogist. It was Still Life of Age and Notes on the West Coast. Those two are, I feel like, one of my favorites because they are such in conversation with each other. And this really relates to our whole conversation now about geography and the whole concept of diasporic writing. Notes on the West Coast was about my recent experience traveling to the West Coast and going on vacation there. And Still Life of Age was just basically a snapshot of my childhood growing up in the Philippines. So those two are very distinct in theme and they contrast each other with it as well because one is in America, one is in the Philippines, but I think they find common ground in basically this whole memory of location and geography. So yeah, notes on the West Coast. I was basically writing a lot about how different it is and conflicting it is with the South, because with the East Coast basically, because I went to visit Los Angeles, I visited Vegas, and so being a Southerner living in the South for quite a while, it's very different, not only in climate and weather, but at the same time, like how people function and their social and interpersonal like connections. So yeah, but on the flip side, Still Life of Age was one of my favorites as well because it was basically how I grew up, like I said, in the Philippines. There's not really a fixed route and fixed theme to that poem, but it was more so just these quotidian, like specific, minuscule moments that I find very intimate growing up that made its way into my writing. Because, like I said, poetry just isn't just this big like monumental, catastrophic sort of thing. It can be this honed in specific subject because there's no really, sometimes my poems just don't have themes at all. Sometimes it's just there. I write it because for the sake of writing it. But yeah, those who were some of my favorites, but there was this one piece published a couple of months ago in the Shore is called Contrapuntal for Dead Loves. It's about the Southern experience as a whole. So yeah, it's basically just a poem where I contrasted a lot of, my feelings as a immigrant and my feelings as someone who lives there. Because I talked a lot about how like people are in the South because I live in Georgia and I would say Atlanta is not really it's not really a city where people would associate the South with. My whole philosophy with writing is just to try my best to grab and grasp onto these different specific details of a concept and seeing if I can transform it into something much more bigger than its original form. Because I think I really try my best to be as open-minded as I can when it comes to writing. Like you can do so much things with a metaphor. You can have a metaphor inside a metaphor or have an image inside an image and really try your best. I try my best with wordplay a lot and just trying to experiment as much as I can with these different devices. So yes.
All right. I was going to mention that Contrapuntal for My Dead Loves was one of my favorites as well. If you're interested in checking out Jaiden's
Right.
poetry, you should definitely read that one because
Thank
it's
you so much.
pretty
Oh my gosh,
awesome
wait.
and
I'm gonna go
definitely a
grab
good
a
support.
copy. I'm gonna grab a copy of my book and show you guys. So yeah, this is the book I was talking about. It's How to Migrate Ghosts, and it's a poetry
Oh yeah,
chaplet.
yours truly designed the cover,
Yes,
so you
Nico
guys,
actually
you
helped design this
shout out.
cover. So yeah, but yeah, before time runs out, it's basically a collection of poems that share the themes that Nico and I discuss a lot today, where I try my best to talk about my experience as an immigrant in the Philippines, but at the same time, my experience as an immigrant here in America. So, it's like two sides of the same coin. But yeah, I hope you guys could take a look at this if you can. It's under Keith Books. But yeah, thank you, Nico, for, this wonderful opportunity for me to talk about my identity as an immigrant, but at the same time, my identity as a writer. It was a very freeing thing to talk about. And I hope whoever is watching this gets to learn a thing or two from my personal philosophies in poetry and writing. So yes. You guys check out
Yeah,
Nico's
thank
work
you
too.
so much.
She's
Oh,
beautiful. She's amazing. Her work is immaculate. So yeah.
okay, thank you so much, Jaden, for
Of
all of
course.
that and for interviewing with us today at Aster.
Mhm.
It was really fun. I really liked hearing about your process.
Mhm.
And to all our listeners at Aster, I hope this interview was interesting to look at. Make sure check out Jaden's poetry as always.
Thank you so
Read
much.
our magazine too, because it's
Yes.
awesome stuff.
Master Lit is a
And
beautiful place to read. I love it. It was one of
yes,
the things I
awesome.
started reading when I was first started writing. So this is like a full circle moment. Happy New Year's. Have a great New Year's.
Happy
And
New Year's! If you're
late
watching
Merry
this later,
Christmas.
then happy 2026.
Yeah, 2022 is
Um,
gonna be great. Yeah, love you
yeah,
guys.
and have a great rest of your day. Peace out.